Here we are. Good morning, everybody. Um, Thanks for joining us. My name's Sam, the Housing Commons Research Center. Happy to see you all. Um, I'm mostly here in a supporting role, um, and really will just pass it off to my colleague Nat, who will be leading the show today. So please take it away.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name's Nat. I use they, them pronouns, and I will be your host today. I'm calling in from Montreal on the unceded territory of the Ganagahaga Nation. Welcome. This webinar is being hosted by the Housing Commons Research Center. It's a new emerging research center looking at various forms of community-led housing in Canada and beyond. So today we're here to talk about eco-villages or eco-communities and now narrow in on that intersection between housing affordability and long-term sustainability. Um, we have a panel that we've assembled today representing projects in Guelph, Ontario, Wakefield, Quebec, and in Newfoundland in Mount Pearl. Do I got that right? No, I didn't get that right. I'm so sorry. Well, you'll correct me. You'll correct me. It's in Newfoundland. Really exciting to have each of these speakers in conversation together so we can learn a little bit more of what eco-villages or eco-communities are and the role that they're playing right now in Canada. And so I'll do the introductions of the speakers, but I'll let you guys before we get into the questions introduce yourselves a little bit as well. Our conversation will run about 90 minutes. We'll have a chance for Q&A from the audience, so please you can enter questions as we go along, and we'll answer them at the end. I believe that's all I need to say before we can go ahead and get started here. Um, I'll start with Wendy. Wendy Reid Fairhurst is a founding member of the Killick Eco Village Cooperative. It's a 57-acre regenerative farm and soon to be 51-unit mixed income co-housing cooperative based just outside of St. John's in Newfoundland. The focus has been trying to make rural co-housing eco-village accessible to anyone who wants to participate using a novel 10-year model called the Mutual Home Ownership Society, which is used in the UK, and it enables community investment at various scales and timelines to match individual needs and capacities. So we'll be excited to hear a little bit more about that. And because Newfoundland is a remote province and largely rural, there's been a lot of need to invent and innovate and learn to do things self-sufficiently over there. And so in the process of creating the Killick Eco Village, to make sure that that knowledge wasn't lost, a few of the members formed Reclaim Community CDO, which is a nonprofit meant to build up the community-led housing ecosystem across Canada. So we'll be sharing some links to that as well, and you can go and look at some of their resources and toolkits that they offer. Next up, we have Rob Cole from Biblioterre. Biblioterre is an agroecological solidarity co-op in Wakefield, Quebec. It's 709 acres, located on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabeg in Western Quebec. So aside from holding down various administrative roles, Rob is engaged in Biblioterre's Algonquin liaison team. It's young farm business, it's reforestation initiatives, and it's gradual renovation of a barn for the sake of future rescued grazing animals. Rob's passionate about finding the links between affordable housing and agroecology and between collective land ownership and inherent Indigenous land rights. While not volunteering for Biblioterre, he works locally as an arborist. And last but certainly not least, we have Mary Kate Craig, who is with Junction Village Community Land Trust in Guelph, Ontario. Mary Kate, sorry, is a catalyst, community weaver, and researcher, co-founder of the Junction Village Community Land Trust in Guelph. She has over 20 years of experience in community-based systems change, and she works at the intersection of housing transformation, land stewardship, and regenerative futures. She holds a PhD in social sciences focused on enabling Indigenous-led nature-based solutions and regenerative economies in Canada. Through the Community Land Trust, she's helping to reimagine urban land access by grounding housing in long-term stewardship, relational governance, and collective care. Junction Village is an evolving, multi-generational, intentional community experimenting with shared spaces, gentle density, sociocratic decision-making, and alternatives to extractive housing models. And so we clearly have three very interesting panelists today representing various projects that I'm sure have some commonalities, but also some important distinctions between the two. I have a set of questions, or between them all, rather. I have a set of questions to lead us through today, and I'll give speakers a chance to respond to them each. But as I said, please feel free to drop questions into the Q&A, and we can go from there. And so, my first question would be, how are each of your communities balancing environmental values with the very real need to keep housing accessible? I think many folks often think that those two can be in competition to each other, but more and more we do see projects such as yours that are trying to put them in balance and not see them as two competing forces. So I'll open the floor to whoever would like to tackle that one first.
I can take that one first if I can kind of explain our mutual home ownership society at the same time. Um, we started as a co-housing community. Um, Basically, we were focused on the environmental and social sustainability aspects of neighborhoods. In particular, I had little kids and I needed help. I had a partner who worked away a lot of the year, and I was just finding my current house where we had this, single family detached with a property that we were turning into a food forest. We had like the American dream, and it just was not working. And I just talked to a lot of other people who this was a problem for. So we started off from that vantage point. It wasn't really like affordability, it wasn't really regenerative. It was just like my own personal problem. But as we explored it and as we found land, as we started talking to people and other people were joining, all of these pieces really came together to form a much better project. But our focus always was making sure that people weren't left out. So co-housing is usually done as a condo, and there was absolutely no way to make the condo model affordable. You've got to take the construction costs and the development costs, and you've got to split them evenly across people in the community, and the costs are just so high that you can't make it work. Uh, Maybe somebody can. We couldn't make it work. So then we explored, different options. We looked at the community land trust model and the cooperative housing model, and there's little things that didn't work for both. For one, we needed to raise investment money from our local community. Our members, in the co-housing model, it's the members themselves who fund the project. We needed a piece of that, but we didn't want it to be fully reliant on that because that was the piece that made it unaffordable. So our mutual home ownership society allows us to take investment from people at different levels, but over time, those investments all equal out. And so we have higher earners involved, we have lower earners involved. People are putting in money as they can at different paces. But at the end of the day, they all kind of equal the value of the house that they're going to live in. And so this has been really important for us in rural Canada, where things like community bonds, we don't have enough population to do a community bond drive. We might be able to raise $70,000. We're not raising $20 million. So that's why we've been a lot longer than it should have taken, but we've been figuring out these things and making it accessible. And then our commitment back is to share everything we've learned so that this doesn't stop with us, that we figured out the problem and then we've got our 57 acres and 51 houses, and we're happy to just sit here. We formed Reclaim to kind of keep this going after our eco village gets populated. So, yeah.
I could jump in after you because I started with very similar intentions and for similar reasons. We came together on this urban property. My husband and I when we first met, we were living with a number of other people in one house, so we were kind of trying out what does it feel like to all live together. And then when it came time to have our children, then suddenly it was like, okay, now what does this look like? And I think initially I had thought, oh, I need to go and move to Manitoulin Island and buy a big property and convince a lot of people to come and live somewhere else. But then we just suddenly started to realize that where we were, we could weave it together. So using existing infrastructure in the middle of a city, like we live really close to downtown Guelph. We own our own property goes back like almost a whole city block. So it's got this like massive backyard. And we were able to come together and using, lots of different community financing and different ways, and a kind father who would co-sign these types of things. We were able to buy the property next door and put those two properties together. And about 20 years ago, or 19 years ago, my first daughter was born, and similar to what Wendy was pointing to, I was just so clear that what was happening wasn't how I wanted to raise my children. And my husband sometimes now says like breastfeeding was very dangerous because as I had this like quiet time of space and I was breastfeeding and looking out the window at the sixplex apartment building across the road, I was suddenly like, what would that look like if it was filled with our friends? Could we build a garden on top? So, and then one day I just drove by and the people who clearly owned it were there. And for some reason, I very boldly went up and said, hey, if you're ever thinking about selling it, we'd like to buy it. And we weren't really in a position to do that. And then it just happened that I thought I was planting a seed, but that night they came back and said, we want you to buy it. So suddenly we had to be like, okay, how are we going to get this money and do this thing? And so it's very organically kind of arisen. And probably over the last 20 years, as I was pointing to you, probably longer than that even. But this transition to create a community land trust has come much more recently. And we had the idea, then we went to the first CNCLT summit in Toronto, and then we created it right after that as a not-for-profit. And we are still in the conversation about how do we actually make this work? How do we transition these properties? What does this look like? What are the steps? And we became quite expansive with it. And now we are very focused. It's focused on one property now. That's what we're doing. We're doing one property, and we are working out really we're experimenting with how can we make this work on this one property so that similar to what Wendy was pointing to, we can collect the case studies. So we can collect what's working, what isn't working inside of the system, and then we can share it out. Because what's beautiful about what's being created here is it's existing infrastructure. It's very possible. If we can make something work, we'd love to give it to whoever'd like it and try to create more islands of coherence, more spaces where, okay, something's working, and then we can put them all together. So that's kind of the grassroots place. And the question for me that I've been holding is like, what does it look like to decolonize our backyard in Guelph? What would that actually mean? What are the actions associated with that? How would we walk that? So that's been part of our inquiry in this. I'll hand it to you, Rob.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation. Um, so just to, I'm going to try and get into the question that was asked. I'm a little bit thrown off because a smoke detector has been going off for the last 15 minutes, which is one of the many colorful elements of living with a lot of roommates. Um, but I think everything's settled now. I don't think the house is on fire. So I'm part of a not-for-profit solidarity cooperative in Western Quebec called Bibliothèque, which is roughly translated to mean the land library, which was a name that we chose um, to hopefully quickly convey a certain outlook on the land that the intention is to facilitate access to land without colonial notions of land ownership. And um, and we did a somewhat similar model that I believe Wendy is describing around the housing, where we funded a down payment collectively amongst our members, but allowed for varying levels of contribution that are intended to more or less equalize over the long term so that there isn't this sense of there being entitlement and power attached to the money itself that can also create more ways of entry for our members. And it was in the pandemic, so we got record low mortgage rates, and we purchased this big piece of land that nobody wanted for some reason that was on the market for 5 years, and it is approximately 709 acres. That includes mixed zoning. So 600 acres is zoned agriculturally and 100 acres is zoned for housing. So we've always had the intention of, aside from getting into all of the different values at this moment, we've always had the intention of um, pairing affordable housing with accessible farmland opportunities to create land-based livelihoods or to restore healthy human relationships with the landscape in ways that are also aligned with our goals to be um, like diverse, focused on membership with QT BIPOC community and to be in relationship with the local Algonquin reserve, which is Kitigan-Zibi, which is very close to us as well. We had to start a second cooperative called Habitation Bibliothèque to manage the portion of the land that has the housing zoning. And so we've been, if I'm just going to focus on Habitation Bibliothèque for a moment and think about affordability in relation to ecological buildings and expenses, we've had to just constantly adjust our structure and our approach, kind of flipping between becoming an affordable rental housing co-op and becoming a co-ownership model that sometimes we refer to as a limited equity affordable housing co-op. So when it comes to defining affordability, we're thinking about the relationship of a few different pieces. So our rents or our loan payments are largely dependent on the costs that we will incur to build and maintain the homes. We're doing this within a broader context where overall cost of living is going up across the board. And then doing that within a broader context where we're living in a time of climate crisis. So in terms of the building costs associated with natural materials, we're considering the different trade-offs. So, um, whereas some ecological materials can be perceived to be more expensive in the upfront, we're trying to sort out, like, does the longevity of the materials themselves, does the ease of repair of the designs of the homes allow there to be less maintenance costs over time, and more upfront costs in the beginning might be compensated in that way. And um, while the expense of building ecologically may create a financial barrier, when we're thinking about accessibility, we're also wondering if the materials themselves remove other barriers, such as those affecting people living with chemical sensitivities and allergies to mold, which is a significant problem in our area. So, um, if we're thinking about the larger context of the cost of living, intentional communities and community land trusts have endless opportunities to support reductions in cost of living. We have the opportunities to reduce transportation costs, such as by creating vehicle share programs, creating local, hyper-local markets that can benefit both on-site workers and on-site consumers. Uh, Intentional communities can reduce food costs, such as by providing land for people to grow their own, or by facilitating trade-based economies, or bulk ingredient purchasing clubs. Um, People can benefit from mutual aid programs, such as fees and subsidies that are linked with one's household income. And these communities can offer things like tool libraries and skill building workshops that help bring down the cost of community services and putting more of that power in the hands of the people. So my point is just um, that we're intending to demonstrate and look to other examples of how to bring down one's overall cost of living, um, because the majority of the strategies to do so are simultaneously ecological acts, ones that reduce consumption, ones that involve more sharing and more of a culture of repair. So, ideally, if we link all of these strategies together, we can provide a more helpful definition of affordability that is within reach and that does not necessarily demand that we have to compromise our ecological values or building practices. Thank you. Pass.
Awesome. Thanks to all three of you. You put lots on the table to discuss for sure. And thanks for yeah, getting us started. So we touched on it a little bit. Some of you guys, some of your projects are a bit more remote or rural than others, and Junction Village is right by downtown Guelph there. So my next question is getting into the urban versus rural context, really. What do each of those contexts or environments make possible when it comes to climate resilient, affordable housing?
Okay, I'll put my hand up first again.
For sure.
Um, so, I mean, the biggest thing with our project is that we have 57 acres, and normally in our context, that would be, 51 single acre houses, like big fancy homes, one road going in. Each individual would have a septic tank and its own well. So we're building on only 5 acres and we're building 51 houses. So we're building it a lot more efficiently but the other thing is that we're able to plan out all of our climate resilience across the 57 acres. So instead of like a small little lot where you know, you've got the smallest little bit of water that you can manage. We have an entire side of a hill where we can manage the water. So our biggest feature, because we're in Newfoundland and it's just going to get stormier and more wind and more rain, we've really focused on the bioswale. So we have kilometers long bioswale, which is basically just a ditch on contour that collects all the water coming down. Instead of moving it to the municipal system, which is how things are designed here, usually it's ditched to move as fast as possible. We slow the water down so that it can percolate into the soil, and the downhill side of that ditch is actually all planted with a food forest. So we're using the climate change impacts to our benefit to grow food, and we're controlling all the flow downhill. So as things get worse, we're going to be a neighborhood that actually keeps water on site. Every other community is seeing more and more flooding downhill, and we're near the ocean, so everything's just trying to get to the ocean as fast as possible. Fast moving water creates erosion. We're planting trees, so we're stabilizing the landscape. So a lot of what we're doing has to do with wind and rain in particular. But because, you know, because we're able to build 51 houses in such a small area, we're able to do this on a smaller scale too. So we've got a lot of we've just thought about this a long time about how every little piece, you know, we've got a common house, which is the co-housing feature, and we're going to have a masonry stove. So it's you know, we've got wood on the land, we've got an emergency hub, and everybody can access that. We've got a big huge dining room and a big huge kitchen. This all allows all of our individual houses to be a lot smaller. And the triplex that we've designed looks exactly like the neighbor's house, which is a single family detached home. So we've really thought about the context. We've talked to the neighbors. We fit in, except that we're doing things a lot differently. And so that's a part of getting people on board with climate resilience. So.
Great answer. Rob or Mary Kay, you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure, I can. So we're obviously in a really different context because we are right downtown Guelph. And differently from how you've started, Wendy, where you've actually really planned something, which is, I think, the more like that is usually the way these types of projects are happening, where people have come together and then planned something. We're kind of coming at it. We're kind of backing into it because we're using existing infrastructure, and yet we have a vision for where it will go next. So we're we're living inside of the system now, and we can try things and iterate, and we've done all sorts of things. Like we have a car share, but we signed a contract for a car share to be there, and they never put a car there. So we kind of did a car share of our own, and then eventually they put a car share. And we're just really trying things, and we have a vision for a beautiful co-house that will go into one of the properties, but it doesn't exist yet. And so in the interim time, in the summer, we put up a big tent. It's like a massive, like the first year that we did it, we had a big wedding tent, and the next year is a big tarp and we've done that for a number of years. And it's an area that in the winter is a skating rink. And then in the summer, it's this giant tent, and people gather there, and we do weekly potlucks, and we have an outdoor kitchen. But we also have tried out like in spaces where we think in the future we'd like to build a house here, we'll just pop a big tent up for like a big over the summer. And we have two people who have brought their own tents, and they set them up and they live there for the summer. They just try it. They use the outdoor kitchen. We have an outdoor shower. We have a community sauna. So it becomes a way that we can try the flow of the spaces and try out, okay, this is how it will feel. Or it has that great sort of angle to it, that we can try things over a period of time. But the other thing that's great about being in an urban setting is we're actually not dependent on each other in the way that eco-villages often are, where people live here, have their own jobs, have different levels of income, and we're able to really create an ecosystem. So it isn't only one type of housing. We're actually experimenting with we live in a single family house. We have a number of 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom units. We have people who live in like a shared room in a co-house. We have beds that are in a shared space, like a hostel space, and people who live in that for a long period of time. And sometimes people come and they're like, oh, I'll just come for a little while and I'll try that until I get something else. And then they stay for a real long time because it's affordable and there's community. And so we have a lot of international students who also come and stay and find incredible community in the city, because they're like able to come together with people from all over. So we're able to try a whole bunch of things. We have long-term people, short-term people, and so it really creates an ecosystem. Instead of just we're only this or we're only that, we're like always just responding to who is coming forwards and what's needed. And at different times, we've had a food share, we've had, group meals. We've done co-buying and bulk buying together. We've had shared childcare that happens, like a shared nanny across 7 families. And so it's always just very organic and from the ground up. It's like, let's try that, and then so there's a lot of freedom in, I don't know if anyone else here is reading Hospicing Modernity, and that book gave me a feeling of a lot of freedom inside of this time, because I mean it's hard reading in a lot of ways, and it's like, oh, we're actually in this breakdown and there's failure that can happen. So if we know that we're moving towards embracing that we actually don't know what's coming, and we can see the edges of something, but we're designing towards what those edges might be, but we're using what's happening right now, like that, like how the world is, and we're trying to pull things into different places, but it's very experimental. It also has a real feeling of like lightness and fun inside of it. It's like, how do we create communities that people actually want to be part of and that are fun to be in, and that it isn't only one monoculture? And maybe the last thing just to say is that inside of trying to do this in an urban space, the other piece that has been really important is, for a long time, what we wanted to do was illegal. So we were talking about creating this village setting inside of spaces that were zoned as single family houses. So what we were talking about, what we essentially couldn't do it. So it didn't mean that we stopped talking about it. It meant that we kept playing in it. And now suddenly everything's like starting to catch up, like the rules are changing. We have these 3 properties, and we can now build 4 units on each of those properties. So we can have a big co-house. We can add to them. The by right things have started to change. So I think what I can see as possible inside of doing this in an urban space is you're actually trying to work inside of what exists right now, and then keep pulling it into that frothy space of change and possibility, and also keep working with local officials to walk them through, because for a while we felt like we had to like be careful because they were going to shut down everything we did, and now we're like touring the mayor through. So it's like this interesting new time where we're like, okay, come look at, and they're excited about it. Like suddenly the city's like, could you sit on this panel, or could you come and be part of this? So they're seeing that this type of living is what they want to encourage, and they don't really know how to. So now they're looking for like, okay, what did you find in the experimentation stages? So, yeah. And all that is just to say, I think both have huge value. So like, it isn't like one's better than the other. It's like in all these spaces, how do we just keep experimenting with village making and relational living, and and then share out the ideas so we can spark things everywhere. So I'll close with that and hand to you, Rob.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mary Kate. So Bibliothèque, as I mentioned before, is located in Western Quebec. It's um, near Wakefield. It's highly Anglophone here, and so I can't really speak to jurisdictions outside of where I'm located. And I'm deep into the learning process right now, and every day finding new organizations, making new outreach emails for all the different avenues of our Bibliothèque project. Um, when it comes to um, like different policy questions or um, there's a very there seems to be a reputation in Quebec for that it is very supportive of cooperatives and collective structures, which so far we have found to be the case. We've been able to partner with or to find membership and representation in various federations that have helped us to form our cooperative legally and financially. Uh, we have also found similar cooperative support organizations that are specifically focused on housing and housing cooperatives. And um, there are numerous agricultural bodies that set the standards for what can and cannot happen on agricultural land that teach us a lot and um, set parameters for what we can and cannot do. But it's because our our vision is so highly dependent on environmental values and practices, it hasn't yet created much restriction in any of our creative visioning. Um, and similar to the municipality and the regional municipality that we're in communication with, for the most part, we've been receiving a lot of support, a lot of openness to our ideas, and a bit of financial support along the way. One of the main barriers that we are facing that comes from planning changes and bylaw changes at the regional municipal level put restrictions on the density that we're allowed to build homes, which affects the amount of homes we're allowed to build. It puts pressure on the residents to on fewer residents to put more capital towards the pre-development costs, the construction around the roads and septic systems, and it means that um, well, it's ultimately meant that we've been disqualified from the CMHC Cooperative Housing Development Program because we haven't been able to meet that minimum amount of units, and the rents that we've calculated um, haven't been able to be within the affordable threshold because we're limited to single family homes with multiple envelopes, multiple furnace and electrical systems instead of one large collective building or a few large collective buildings, which we initially had hoped to achieve. So we've been pivoting and restructuring and coming up with numerous creative alternatives that seem to overlap with again with what Wendy has mentioned in terms of smaller footprints, but more collective spaces, um, looking at the ways that community services can be reduced with um, incentives for more volunteerism and community participation, and then all of the different cost of living options that I was mentioning earlier. So in terms of the rural versus urban question, I moved here from Toronto and had this debate constantly with my friends who ended up staying in the city, um, who did not relate to my very deep felt need to get out and to move into a wider space environment. But I definitely don't believe in and one environment being more advantageous than the other. And really, our Bibliothèque project um, is very much is based on wanting to develop a direct link with urban communities in Gatineau and Ottawa and elsewhere to facilitate more exchanges of ideas and exchanges of projects. And um, yeah, so what no matter where you are, you're on land, you're connected to water, and you're surrounded by wildlife. It's there's just something that seems to be unique to rural environments in terms of connecting on a deep level um, with the natural world. So, you know, there's a there's there's something that changes within people when there's an immersion in nature and reminders of our smallness, reminders of our um, yeah, ancestral lineages and um, connecting again with the stars and with the elements and just very direct opportunities to observe biodiversity and habitats over the long term that with less human interruption. Um, Aside from being a venue where you can very directly test and practice endless forms of ecosystem restoration and reforestation, climate adaptation and mitigation techniques, the rural environments seem to be uniquely capable of helping people rejuvenate from burnout and regain energy and perspective so that they can continue doing the work they're doing, whether they are based in a rural or urban setting. So that is something um, that our co-op has been able to provide to people is some respite and recuperation and sense of clarity that can help in experimentation and innovation around addressing all of the different related challenges that we have together. So, okay.
Great.
Yes.
Thanks all for weighing in on that. I have so many questions for all of you. Oh yeah, Wendy, you want to jump in? Want to respond to something? Do
Just
it.
a quick addition, yeah, because I mean, I'm feeling the same. I feel like there's some similarities in what we are trying to do. Um, we were able to so we did a permaculture plan on the whole property and then we did our housing plan and we were able to like really condense things, but it didn't fit any of the zoning anywhere in Newfoundland. But we were able to, over the period of 2 years, actually create an eco-village zone just for our property. And so we're able to do all of the climate resilience things that we want to do that we would not have. Almost every single zone in the province, but definitely in our community, all needed to have a municipal road with single family detached houses and a certain frontage. And we were able to get rid of all of that and just basically, it was not a planned unit development because we weren't allowed that. We just created our own zone instead. And it did take, so that's the thing with rural is that we've had support for so long. But they were really like so, but they let us do something really great. It just took a long time. And a lot of that had to do with their own capacity. We don't have a planner on staff. We don't have an architect on anywhere in the province on any government review panel. We have a few engineers. So everything has been taking a long time, but the benefit of it is that they're just like they've been so supportive of us being able to do what we want to do. So sure, we're not moved in 4 years ago, which would have been great. So, anyways, if that helps at all.
I have a couple things to add too. So what it has been interesting is to find that line and then lean over it, right? And lean over it, sometimes asking for forgiveness rather than permission. Like I think sometimes from the city, I've done things like just close the road down. Like we would close the road down every week. And I suddenly realized you could close the road down and then you could suddenly have this space where you could gather people right on the road and you could do it by applying for a street party. permit, and you only had to pay once, and you could like go get city signs. And so when my kids were younger, when they saw road closed signs, they'd go by and be like, "Oh, those people must be having a potluck." Like that's what it started to mean for them, rather than city was digging up the road. So like we did that for a period of time to play with an idea and to just try things. So um, I think and what we're doing at this point is so different than what both of you are doing, where you've really had to um, co-create. And I love, Wendy, what you just said, that you actually were able to create your own zone. Like that's amazing that you were able to work with the local municipality to be like, you're actually missing a whole piece. Because I realized I also kind of skimmed over the affordability question a little bit before, and I wanted to just loop back to it to say, what I've realized is that affordability is at the end of our sentence. So what often people are saying is, this is affordable housing. And I can get, having gone to lots of things about affordable housing, I can get that what we're doing isn't affordable housing. But what we're trying to do is create housing that is affordable, as well as energy efficient. And like it's not leading with affordability. It's like affordability is what we're trying to get to, but we're trying to get to it inside of a vision that is actually quite different than the vision. And I think you pointed to this, Rob. We don't qualify for anything either, because the way they've created affordable housing financing pathways is so very specific. We're too small, and we're not going to achieve what those affordability like financing packages are wanting. So yeah, we're in that middle space. And I think that middle space, I think it's actually what makes us exciting, is that it doesn't fit into anything that is existing at the moment. So actually, it's creating a conversation in a very different space with a different group of people, to say, what does it look like to bring these elements in, and then just try to live differently and try things out. And then my last thing is just to say that, like, the biggest issue is that you're dealing with this commodification of land and this idea that your housing is supposed to be your biggest investment. And so people are inside of that. They're like, I have to buy housing so that I can accrue wealth. And it's like, no, that's why your kids can't buy any. Like, that's why we're in this. And so when we're then trying to reclaim this, so, a few times we've gone to, um, uh, people to give us advice about money, and they're like, everything you're doing, stop doing it. Don't do those things. Because we're like taking this thing that people call your largest asset, and we're like, how do we make this owned by a community of people? And they're like, don't do that. And I'm like, but you have to do that in order to break the system. And so you have to just be in that space where people can be like, oh, maybe something's possible, but you have to unlearn something that's deeply ingrained in our society at the moment, which is, I have to own a house to be okay. So anyways, all those ones.
Really great discussion there. And yeah, the eco-village zoning, super cool. That's a huge win. And I think we were starting to discuss there a little bit of how to make these projects work within the existing constraints of sort of land use planning and those side of frameworks. I'm interested to know, just to pivot a little, to know, I guess, how these projects come to work within, I mean, like mainstream funding frameworks. We had a little bit of a discussion, Rob, you mentioned there that the cooperative housing development program was demanding too high of a density that's feasible on your site. I'm curious to know, I suppose, how you've managed to finance some of these projects. And we did have a specific question over in the chat to you, Rob, so maybe we can start there. Somebody was wondering how Bibliothèque purchased the land, whether it was, a founder private purchase, or was it through a loan or a community bond raising campaign. So maybe we can start with you, and we'll pass the mic on the topic of funding and financing.
Yeah, so um, I think when we were first starting, it's hard to really identify when the exact beginning of our co-op is. There is the date of constitution, but there's also the years before that where meeting with so many different people, some of whom came in and left, and um, there, as we transitioned from being more vision-based and started to get into the weeds and um, do our research, do get our paperwork signed, and start working with these organizations that help the formation of cooperatives. It's it was a bit against the spirit of the project to start thinking about it as needing a business plan. It didn't feel like a business. It just felt more organic than that. But um, nonetheless, to demonstrate where the money comes from and what rights are attached to those investments um, was a critical part of us getting a mortgage with the bank as a cooperative, as a not-for-profit, um, without them needing to dig into the financial history of each individual member and um, and we created a I guess a two-phase approach. So the long-term intention with the land is that we would be creating opportunities for free or very low cost relationships to the land. So you could come into the commons, have access to the lands, the green spaces, the trails, tool libraries, all the community resources. And at the same time, we would offer opportunities for private space and time on the land for people who maybe wanted to build their own housing or start an independent initiative on the land and rent acreage from the cooperative. So the the long-term phase that we were aiming for was more based on collectivity funded by dues and privacy funded by fees for depending on your usage and your amount of space that you want for yourself. In the beginning, not even having the land, not having spaces to actually rent out privately, uh, we started a very basic system of dues to help us fund the constitution of the co-op, to help us open up a collective bank account, to just help us in developing our initial relationships with the different institutions. And we created a share that allowed members to invest whatever they could if they wanted to. We had a threshold that we needed to meet, which was 25% down payment on the cost of the land. And we made an incentive. So if anyone was able and willing to invest a large sum of money into the cooperative, they would know that in the future, when the land's able to offer private spaces or able to offer lands for housing, that they would be reserved a spot in that um, in that unfolding. So those shares are intended to be repaid over time, and essentially, like to oversimplify it, they would work as a credit towards future fees. So in the future, everyone's paying fees, but shareholders have those fees deducted from their shares, theoretically to end up at a balanced um, zero amount for each person at the end. And um, so we did that to fund the down payment of the land, and we did a similar process to fund the annual operations costs. So the mortgage payments, utilities, insurance, taxes, everything that we needed to pay from year to year to basically give us time to start creating other revenue streams on the land. So starting up a basic agricultural business, starting to run events and workshops and fundraisers, creating rental units within the one existing farmhouse, which is not on fire. And um, and so that's given us some time over the last few years to also start working on the longer term plan of creating housing on the land, which ultimately will lead to more people being able to be here long term, set down roots, create businesses, fix the dilapidated structures, caretake for the depleted soil and the overlogged forest. And um, yeah, and so we have different, we're always working on our different fundraising campaigns as well and looking at partnering with a charity to help us do tax deductible receipts. But so far, it's donations have just been given freely, and they've been a minimal but very helpful part of our project. And we had some, just lastly, had some grants attributed to the creation of a community garden space, helping us set up some off-grid irrigation, and a grant to help us restore one of our barns. And yeah, and some other little things like that. Yeah,
Cool.
hope that
Really,
answers questions.
yeah, there was a specific sort of follow-up question from Anonymous here. Do the member dues pay for the carrying costs of the mortgage each month, or how does, not to get too into the weeds, but
The dues are largely connected to certain costs associated with what we've deemed to be commons related expenses. So some of our collective insurance costs, our utilities for our community center spaces and event spaces and gardens, our memberships in cooperative federations, our bank account numbers, um, our just smaller monthly essential costs. But the mortgage itself is largely self-funded, again, by different members who are putting in what they can, keeping tabs as to what everyone's put in, and giving us time to evolve towards more of a pay-per-use land sharing model.
great. Thanks so
Yeah.
much, Rob. Yeah, maybe Wendy or Mary Kate, do you want to weigh in on this question, sort of financing strategies?
Yeah, I can first because ours is very similar. We started off, we bought land by a group of people putting in loans as much as they could. But we were able to buy 49 of the acres outright. And the front land had a house on it. So I personally took out a mortgage and bought the front 7 acres with house with my parents, who I've sort of they're in the project too. They're going to be moving in. But slowly over time, the co-housing group has been, or like the Eco Village has been able to buy out the land. So I purchased the house. So I moved here. I sold my other house and moved here. We sold a property. So we were 58 acres. We're 57 now. And then we did a vendor take back. So I'm the vendor, and our eco village purchased from me with the due date being when before we start construction, they have to pay the rest of it. So we're still working on that piece. But over time, those loans changed into our mutual home ownership society model, which is our whole community investment piece. So the way that it works is that people they have to give us a loan, or they're promising to give us a loan up to the value of the house, but they do it at different increments. So we've got this minimum of $15,000 that most people can put in. There's always an affordability pathway for that, as long as we can financially make it happen. We've got different pathways for people to come. Some are doing a much smaller payment plan, and some people are asking for it to be waived completely. But so we've got this minimum loan amount of 15,000 that most people are able to give us. So And we've also been really lucky with grants, especially with this knowledge sharing piece. So we've raised like 1.5 million in grant funding. It's not all going towards the pre-development costs, but yeah. And then I became a student so that I could pay myself to work on the project. We're just like finding money in different ways, however we can make this thing work. And now we're ready for the big financing. So, but we've got a lot of assets. We've got like all these members. I think we're up to 20 shareholding members who have given us $15,000 loan, and that's on top of well, only 5 of them were a part of the first land purchase. So we've got a lot of extra money that we can work with. And we just got an FCM grant that's going to allow us to get to the very end of construction drawings. So really all we're looking for now is the financing. And if I can just put a plug for how much I hate the CHDP program, that co-op housing development program, I will use this platform. It is we had 90 points out of 100. So we're one of the best ranking in terms of all those things until they decided that we're an urban project, not a rural project. So we had to have 100 units. So yeah, you guys face the same thing. We're in a province of 500,000 people, in a town of 8,000 people. Like the biggest housing providers that aren't governmental in the province have 100 units, and they're asking us to double that or to match that, sorry. Absolutely ridiculous requirement. So they called us an urban project. And because we had 51 houses, which is huge for this area, we had letters from the town saying this is the biggest project like they could ever envision for this place. We got turned down. So we got docked 20 points. So we went to 70 out of 100 versus 90, and they won't fund us. So I'm working on this piece. I'm working to come to terms with this as technicalities are just bonkers. But at the same time, I think we're really well set up. We've set this mutual home ownership society model up so that we can qualify for financing. So we're hoping to be the first project, maybe Van City finances or our local credit union working with other credit unions because it's a big ask for just one local small rural credit union. But we're basically ready now to get that big financing, which is, I mean, it's a $20 million project. We've got about 2 million raised in community investment, and we've got about 1.5 million in grants. So the rest would be what we're asking for in financing. So pass it to you, Kate.
Thanks so much.
Um, so so again, our scale's different. We are at the moment 2 houses side by side and a 6-plex apartment building. In our current model, it's owned by, so similar to how you've done that, Wendy, it's owned by myself and my husband, and we have set up the community land trust to try to work out how to put this into community ownership, and it's taken a long time. It's not, it's not like not a very simple way. And we are now getting to a place where we can see a path, but that path is we've had to scale back and put a new phase in, which is really a stewardship phase where we will continue. So what we're doing is transferring the properties into a corporate structure, which is what we were trying to avoid doing, but I think it is the thing that's understood. And then that corporate structure has an agreement with the CLT, and then we're using the CLT as a stewardship trust so that a group of people are coming together to manage what's already here and start to think about and work out the financing for what we want to build and create. But it's then giving a group of people the autonomy and the knowledge that it's not owned by us anymore. Like so we had to transfer it into something. And then we have 2 pathways. Either that stewardship trust will stay just stewarding, or we will, and this is something that we're in the process of doing at the moment, or we'll work out a specific date. And then similar to how you did it, Wendy, we'll probably do like a VTB over a period of time. We have talked to different groups who would be happy to offer, like, to give mortgages and to hold this and are excited about what's happening. But at this point, like, a transfer, which is what we've been trying to do for a while, it hasn't been clear. And part of that is like when you start a new organization and try to take yourself out as a founder to transfer it to a community of people. It's, yeah, I could write lots about the difficulties associated with that. I think another thing that we're noticing is there's lots of people who just want to live here and they don't want to govern it. They're like, we just do we have to be part of that? So there's a small group of people who want to be part of trying to raise funds and to finance things. And it is a very small group of people who want to be in those kind of central conversations, and a much larger group. Like we have a large number of people who get in touch with us and would love to live here. And we have this vision for creating more housing, but we're very limited at the moment in how many spaces we have. So that's kind of the push me pull you. And in the old days, when we first started doing this, we could often say to people, come live, like buy the house next door. And we had a whole bunch of friends who did that and purchased housing. But now we're in Guelph and the house prices are not possible for people to do that. So it's actually increasing the need for what we're here trying to do, to put more people onto smaller spaces and to create small living spaces with large shared spaces. This is exactly what we need to do. And it's complex and not easy to do. But I think it's part of the reason why we're doing this is to try to work out models so that we can tell other people, like, okay, this is how we finally achieved it, So yeah, it's definitely not easy to do though. Like you're breaking new ground every time you try to create something like this.
Great. Thanks so much, guys, for weighing in on that one. Go back to my questions. I wanted to zoom out a little bit, I suppose. So you're all stewarding unique, impressive projects that have an impact currently or gearing up to have a larger impact. I'm wondering, in your opinion, why do you think that these models of intentional communities, eco-villages, eco-communities still remain relatively rare and outside the mainstream? We hear about one here or there, but there don't seem to be too widespread right now. When it comes to rural Canada, like land is certainly not the short. There's no shortage of land. What are some of the, I suppose, barriers, whether those are legal, cultural, social, political, whatever you want to take on there, that's preventing the mainstreaming of these sorts of models?
I can jump in, and I think we just pointed to a whole bunch of them. Like one is they're not well understood. So there's like Wendy had to create her own zoning. That's amazing. But how many places are going to be willing to be like, oh, that's actually missing. So we're going to create a whole new zoning space. Most places weren't. I'm quite sure that Guelph is not going to think that way about it. So it's not set up for this. We're outside of the model. Like usually, people were sold a certain way to live, which involved single family homes and having 2.4 kids and living in a certain way, and like that's what we were supposed to do. And this commodification, this financialization of housing, you have to break through that so that people are willing to, if you're going to buy in at a lower amount and you're not using your housing as a way to create wealth, you're creating wealth of different kinds, like wealth that's and you're creating housing affordability through a generational model. And you're embracing this kind of multi-generational and different ideas of family. All those are going against what people think you should do. And in terms of some of the things that we've hit against, like doing this in a urban space, we also have neighbors who are like, what are you doing? Like, why do you keep having these potlucks? And like you're putting a tent up. I don't think you're supposed to be able to do that in backyards. And I'm kind of like who made up what you're supposed to be able to do in a backyard, like when you look out at what backyards are, it's so weird how we've been told we're supposed to live, that we're in these separate little boxes but people are committed to that. So when you're inside, so even though it doesn't work, and we know all the reasons why it doesn't work, when you're doing something that's different, you're hitting those barriers everywhere. Where do you have to have somebody to make this actually work. You'd have to have someone like me, or like Wendy just pointed to that she's doing, who's willing to kind of put their own finances on the line and willing to actually like hold that for a period of time to transition into something else. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that. So why isn't it more widespread? Because I think you don't have the means for it. It's not understood well. And, things are actively blocking it and have been actively blocking it. And so we have to undo those. And then we have to create spaces where people can come and be like, oh, it looks like that. And it's actually not scary. Like it's actually great to share your lawnmower or something. It's like, it doesn't even have to be that radical. But yeah, people don't think about sharing in that kind of way. So yeah, I'll leave it at that and give it over to Rob and Wendy.
Great. Thanks for getting us started.
I'll jump in faster on the mute. So yeah, one of the things about housing as your investment, we went with the mutual home ownership society model because there was people who didn't want to give up the ability of building wealth in your house. They wanted to invest in this thing, and when they were done, they wanted to have savings, either like to give to their family or to be able to move somewhere else. And that was one thing we noticed with the conventional co-op model, is that you put money in, but you don't have anything at the end. And so oftentimes people are in a worse financial situation when they move, like when they move out, than when they moved in. So the way that ours works is, so like I said, you give a loan, which equals the value of the house over time, but you do it at different scales. So we actually have, our rents are 30% of income. And, there's a portion of that that covers our operations costs. But anything above that, up until your 30%, is actually a loan that keeps building up until it's the value of your house. And then you drop down to just a really low fee. And that stays as an investment in the community until you leave. And we repay that to you, and with interest. And so it's a bit of getting everybody involved in social impact investment, in investing in affordable housing, and they leave with money that is at least the same value as when they put it in. It at least matches inflation. But really, we've tied ours to the income index. So if incomes are all going up, then you'll get, up to 5% return. And so there was this piece of just really matching the theory behind collective ownership and then the practicality of like co-op owners, co-op members and renters are losing wealth compared to homeowners, and that's a reality in our economy. So how do we try and equalize that? So that's why we're really excited about the mutual home ownership society model. The other thing, my PhD research that I'm just kind of finishing up has to do with the barriers co-housing groups face specifically, but of course it obviously translates to most intentional communities. And, big things that come out of that is people do these things. It's really hard. They take their knowledge with them when they live. When it's done and they move in and they're like, I am not doing that again. So how do we make it easier for people? The other thing is the participation piece, requiring participation, having to participate. It's different for everybody how much they can and how much they're willing to give to this thing. And it's kind of got to work with varying different levels over people's lifetime of participation. And sometimes, the smaller groups are a lot harder to have enough people working because people get tired. I know, like I've told my group when I move in, I'm having 2 years of just coming to the community meals, and they can figure out the rest of it and just feed me, maybe clean my house. And then the other couple things were like a helper industry. We didn't have anybody to ask to help. We tried they're not available. If there was a whole industry around these things, if there was developers who were totally on board with this thing, if there were like, co-ops we could join that like helped us build this thing, I think that so many more would get built. And then the last one is just the knowledge sharing piece. Like, each of us are trying to invent our own thing. And if we could start pulling them together, I think, Mary Kate, you're also trying, like, now actually, we're all like involved with networking. We know the power of it. It's just how do we like make sure everybody's got the information access, and it's not too inundating because there's a lot out there. So, I mean, a webinar like this is a great way to just kind of like tiptoe into what everybody's doing. But I'll pass it to you, Rob, to clue up.
Yeah, thanks everyone for what you shared. I definitely agree that I relate very much to all of those barriers and very much see various barriers as being interrelated and inseparable from one another. One of the first statistics we read about before we started Bibliothèque was that 90% of intentional communities fail and 10% succeed. And what seems to unite the communities that succeed is that they can hone their vision. They share a vision. It's very clear. So, some intentional communities are religious groups, some are golf clubs, and they can last. They can last a really long time. Um, though what our cooperative represents and what I feel like I'm witnessing in all the other intentional communities and community land trust groups that I've been in contact with, are that the values are much larger than the golf courses or just a specific religious focus. Um, there are deep desires to be decolonial, to engage with the land back movement and have be in right relations with the indigenous peoples of their land, be they under treaty or unceded territories. Um, the the communities want to not result in just being cis het male white able-bodied intentional communities. They there is a recognition of diversity as strength, diversity as resilience and relevance in the world, and those principles are, everyone's trying to um, come together around shared values, but this creates um, it creates endless opportunities for conflict, which can be generative or can scare people away. And the systems in place don't allow for, well, they can allow and they should allow and they need to allow for recognition that a community of people aiming for sociocracy, aiming for non-hierarchical organization won't necessarily mean that everyone who's sitting at the table has any of the reasons to have the same level of risk tolerance, similar capital or resources to lose. And we just encounter these dilemmas a lot. And, we think about ethics in the cooperative around animal rights and collective veganism versus inherent Algonquin rights to access their hunting grounds. Or we think about just how notions of land ownership or disownership are incredibly different between white, black, and indigenous peoples. And, when it comes to, say, like the risks of, let's just build houses, let's just put tiny homes on the land and see what happens. It's like, who is more likely to be seen as suspicious by the neighbors when you're doing something out of the ordinary, and who may face disproportionate risks of housing insecurity if the housing gets swept away from us. And there's so many constant questions which are challenging and outside of people's comfort zones that I think are part of the beauty and purpose of intentional communities. Um, and I understand why they're not common and why they don't survive, but it's worthwhile. And that's just, yeah, part of what I enjoy talking about and why I like to meet other projects and why I'm very nourished by the work that we're doing and trying to do. Thank you for permitting my ramblings. Pass.
Of course. Um, yeah, maybe as we start to close up, I see there's some questions specifically about certain projects. So maybe speakers, if you're comfortable sharing a way to get in contact with you for attendees after the webinar, I'm sure there's some folks that would like to get in touch. And as you do that, I wanted to, we've talked, a bit about, what's going on in your project, some of the barriers you faced, how you've overcome those barriers. Maybe we can close up by talking about, I suppose, like the vision or the dream you're trying to head towards, like what would success look like for each of your individual projects in, let's say, 50 to 100 years or next generation, next few generations. What does that look like in the long run? And what sort of, we're getting into it a little bit now, sort of um transformations in terms of, power relations might have taken place or but yeah, overall, what are you working towards? What does that look like? What would have changed? What would have stayed the same? And then we'll begin to close it up.
I could start with that and just say that, for me, like the success looks like when, a third of most cities are CLTs, or, like that's just like a regular, a way that people are flowing in and out of land, and that we've actually got enough spaces that we start to break the commodification of housing as a norm, and we change the market because it's, you can live in a much better, richer, socially richer space at a fraction of the cost. And we're not there yet. Like, that's not what it looks like. It looks like it's complex and everything else, but it's like we've made it work, and then we've scaled. And I don't know if anyone's read the stuff about the different ways that you can scale, but like I feel like what we're doing at the moment is to scale deeply. Like we're doing lots of that invisible, like deep relational work to change systems that aren't actually that noted. Like you can't actually see it, because sometimes I'll even look at what we're doing and I'll be like, what have we actually achieved here? Like, wait a second. But I can see that like there is so much that's hidden from most people that's weaving away under the surface. And from that, I think we'll form something that, success looks like when this is widespread and normal and really simple, and it's easy to start something, and that people don't think this is strange and that you're some sort of weird cult because you're trying to share lawnmowers and cars and things, like, that like people actually are looking at it as like an obvious pathway towards creating a regenerative future. So to me, that's what success looks like, when this feels mainstream and obvious, which it feels
Beautiful.
obvious to
Thanks.
me.
Rob or Wendy? Wendy, I know your finger's just right above that mute, but you're trying to be courteous.
Wendy, please go ahead. I'm not sure I have much to add. This is a great question, and um, I often go to the space of the future, but I can't always do it, so I'm not sure. But I would say that it would be wonderful if there were alternative conventional modes of collectively stewarding and protecting land that that could face the challenges of the future and modern day, and that the Canadian government would um, would see these as worth supporting and recognize um, that Canadian sovereignty is nothing without the recognition of Indigenous sovereignty on the lands, and then utopia ensues. Okay, pass.
I like that.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm thinking more in practical terms. When we've done a lot of innovation. I kind of wish that we had set up the community land trust earlier because and this came out at the conference last September when I was talking to someone and they said, okay, so you've got this group of people and they're going to be, saving money and then you repay them. You've got these assets at the end of the day that no longer have liens on them. And how do you leverage that to make more affordable housing? And I thought, we don't have the mechanism to do that. And I wish that we had kind of, we were plugging away as we went, and we've got this really great model, but the one piece it's missing is what happens after. And if there's a lot of us who are just really like, I'm okay now, I don't want to be involved with anything more complex, then we've lost the power that this project could have done. So I'm thinking like in 50 years when we've paid off the loan. And so in hindsight and in future projects, I would love to that be just have land trusted first and set that in place to be like long-term affordability is there, and then we do this fun thing with the co-op, and the co-op works independently, but we can use the assets in the future. And so I'm not sure, it might be hard for me to convince people now that we're so far along and people are so like, that's the culture thing. So I might be 50 years and the next person who comes after me the rest of the 50 years, trying to convince everybody that once our stuff's paid off, that like that still gets leveraged into the sector. Yeah, and then just I mean, the way that I see it is if we can have this supportive ecosystem, like all my mutual home ownership stuff that we've created is freely available to anybody. Um, and actually, I would invite Mary Kate and Rob if you guys want to reach out. We're trying to put together a Build Canada Homes portfolio of all of our similar projects across Canada that are like co-ops that didn't fit CHDP or have like something that's just if you're not fitting into one of those portfolios they're trying to build, we're actually going after funding to figure out what a weird portfolio looks like. So reach out on that. But I see that as the way that this thing gets power is that we almost become like a development company, except that we're not doing it in that way. We're doing it in our own ways, but we're working together and really leveraging what we collectively have by still ensuring that we all have the power that we have. Um, so that's kind of my thoughts for the future.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you guys all for your answers. Uplifting. They're very uplifting. They're putting some important thoughts and considerations on the table. And thanks so much for taking part of our the conversation today. I know I learned a lot. I hope you guys are taking something from it. Thank you to everybody in the audience who came to join us today. Some of the speakers have shared contact info in the chat, but we'll share that with their permission as well and in follow-up materials. Hopefully this is just the beginning of more conversations here. And if you're interested to know about future events with the Housing Commons Research Center, you can visit our website or visit us. I believe we're on LinkedIn and Instagram as well. We have some good stuff coming up with monthly webinars. Thank you, thank you, thank you once again to all of our speakers, and I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of their day. See
Thanks so
you.
much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, everyone.